Hello, my name is Olof Skog. I am the European Union's ambassador to the UN here in New York. And this is EU Talks. The goal of the UN is to improve the daily lives of citizens around the world. But the UN is a complicated place. In the EU Talks series, we will openly discuss the UN's work and how it delivers. Every month, EU Talks will engage with diplomats, UN officials, but also with experts, journalists, activists, creating what I hope will be a valuable space, especially for young people. Most people working in and around the UN represent a country or an organization. However, I believe that each of us also have a personal responsibility to find the solutions and to meet the expectations of people around the world. Along those lines, I will be asking some pretty hard questions to all of our guests. Welcome to EU Talks. Hello, I'm Olof Skog. I'm the host of the EU Talks. Today's episode is going to focus on the Commission on the Status of Women. This year's Commission on the Status of Women looks at how gender equality and how women can contribute and are affected by climate change, biodiversity loss, etc. And I'm very proud to have with me today in the studio Fatima Mohammed, who is the representative and ambassador of the African Union here. Of course, the European Union and the African Union are working very closely on these and very many other issues. So Fatima, thank you for joining us today. We also have two women and youth, young women, Jasmine, who is the Swedish youth delegate, part of the Swedish delegation, and Antoinette, who is actually a part of the EU delegation to the Commission on the Status of Women. You're from Botswana, and you're also part of the EU-AU Youth Hub. My friends, I wanted to start asking you, Jasmine and Antoinette, if you could say a few words about your engagement on the gender equality situation, on the youth activists, and also related to the theme of this year's Commission on the Status of Women, the whole climate change issue. So I don't know, whoever wants to start.
Well, personally for me, I have always been involved within the young civil society in Sweden. I started off in my local youth council in Bromma, where I grew up, and then I've been a part of a ton of organizations, and I ended up in the National Youth Council of Sweden. So I always like to surround myself by other young people and to organize and to work for a common cause. And by far, the most important question for young Swedes today is the question regarding climate. We are possibly facing a mass extinction. So to not get involved, that's not even an option for me. Like, I have to get involved in climate. Why I choose to do that parallel with gender equality is because I don't think that we can actually achieve what we need to achieve and get that climate transition that we need without including and involving everyone. And to make sure that that happens on fair and equal terms, I choose to get involved.
Well, I come from, a rural community where farming is part of our life. I studied agriculture. I've always loved the idea of putting seed on the soil, growing food, growing trees, and inevitably so I became an agronomist by profession, working with many women, young women, in rural communities, and I am an aspiring farmer myself. But I find that as an agronomist working with farmers in the field, the conversation doesn't just end around food. There's always just an issue of climate change. And of course, there's always just a huge gap in the policies. And I find that I didn't have the answers as the agronomist. I would always have the answers about soil, about water, about plant nutrition. But in terms of climate change, there was quite the gap. And I decided to take a step forward and joined the Youth Cooperation Hub, where I was able to, work with other young people from Europe, diaspora, and all over the world to kind of sort of benchmark on ideas, what other young people are doing, and carry those same, actions and messages back to my people in Botswana and of course in the SADC region, to kind of just sort of like co-create solutions on how we can solve climate change issues as young people, as young women in our respective countries. So that's how I got involved.
That's very, very, very powerful stories, and thank you for your strong engagement. Part of what we're trying to do in this series of EU Talks is to have youth like yourself putting, pressure on people with power. Fatima has a lot of power. She represents the African Union here at the UN. I don't know that I'm very powerful, but I do represent the European Union. So I do think we have also a personal responsibility to listen and to engage. So maybe if you want to, I don't know if you want to put a few questions to us, or, that what your expectations are when you travel to New York during this CSW, and what are your thoughts? And then I'll be happy to point to Fatima to respond.
One of the things that I've observed in my community is that a lot of the resources are quite, male-dominated or controlled by men in my community, and you find that women have sort of like less of a say in those natural resources, and not just natural resources, even funding. So it would be interesting to just understand or have a perspective on how can we ensure that women have an active role, they have the access to land, the natural resources, and there's some form of shared responsibilities between men and women in our communities.
Well, first of all, thank you, Ola, for having me, and I think that's really a brilliant question, Antoinette. And I think it's a question that we've been asking for a very, very long time. The sharing of resources, the sharing of spaces is a long battle that women and now youth have been fighting for a while. The very essence of CSW is to promote gender equality and women's empowerment. And we have to really look at it from different perspectives. The first would be about raising awareness constantly. You cannot stop in terms of educating and ensuring that people understand, in terms of sensitizing. It's critical that we ensure that when decisions are taken, especially at the policy level, that they are actually translated into national legislator and translated at the local level. So for me, raising awareness, translation of policies, ensuring that they're implemented. And then I think there's a responsibility when it comes to particularly young people to ensure that they actually monitor that these policies, that the commitments that their leaders make are actually, they actually follow through. And I think that's generally, the gap that very often tends to be missing when it comes to the engagement of young people. So I would encourage people to, first of all, educate themselves, ensure that you know what policies are in place. Ensure that those policies are definitely the ones that address the needs. And then when it comes to women in particular, there has to be intergenerational dialogue and understanding in terms of what the needs are, how some of these needs have evolved to the current reality, and how you as young people can ensure that you can actually adapt to some of these changes and also inform other generations in terms of your own needs.
Jasmine, you're from Sweden. A lot of people would say that Sweden has advanced on this a lot, but I think it's also very important that we acknowledge that we're not there yet, and I think that's also true for the European Union that I represent. That this is a constant struggle, if you like. It's cultural, as you say, Fatima. Also in our part of the world, there are male power structures that are sometimes hidden, and that they have to be fought both in terms of education but also on legislation, I think. But it would be very interesting to hear you Jasmine, what's your sense of how do we move forward on this agenda?
Well, we often talk about inclusion and trying to include people in decision-making processes. And I mean, it's very easy to say for like companies or organizations, like, yeah, we would like to include this group more. But often people forget to ask themselves, are we actually willing to make the changes that this group is asking us to do? Because if you're not, then you're not doing the including part correctly. And as a youth delegate and young persons in general, we often get invited to consultations and to meetings, and we show up and we do our best, but it's very rare that we actually see our thoughts and our ideas in the outcome. And it's even more rare that we get to be a part of the evaluation to critique the outcome, and in the last step, which is the implementation. So we're in the first step, but not in the 3 other crucial steps. And then you're not doing it right. Then you're not actually including youth. That is youth washing, that leads to tokenism. And we also talk about decision making and how we should give some groups a seat at the table. You know, you have to get a seat at the table to be a part of this. But it's very rare that we talk about the funding. Like, you need to give me money to be at the seat of the table. So we need to start talking more about investing in some groups to make sure that they are participating in the right way. Because, I mean, you need to invest to get profit. With nothing comes nothing. When it comes to the negotiations, I'm not a part of that. And that's, I mean, probably the most important thing with the CSW. So I would like to see more young people at the seat. I would like to see more young people actually giving the chance to participate in the decision making.
So for me to just having been somewhere really in the deep end of the farm, and now fast forward, you know, moments later, I'm at the CSW. It was a great experience. Of course, I had my own views of how I would have loved the sessions to go, how I would have loved to see more young people, our leaders, our ministers involving young people in, you know, active, you know, dialogues. And the concerning thing for me was, what happens next? When I go back to Botswana, what happens next? Where is the long-term engagement? And, you know, you mentioned, Ambassador, when studying the session, talking about, you know, the AU-EU Youth Hub that is working with young people from all over the world. But you find that those youth-led organizations and women-led organizations are at the risk of, you know, just dying because the support isn't sufficient, or the funding is there, maybe it just gets lost somewhere in a bureaucratic chain of events, and it doesn't actually end up, you know, reaching those initiatives. So it would be interesting to hear from you both. How can we really ensure that the funding goes directly to women-led, youth-led initiatives and extend a lifeline, especially if they have a proven track record that they actually work, and it's the modality that, you know, intergovernmental institutions are trying to adopt to sort of empower young people, empower women. We have proved ourselves. What's next?
Perhaps I can take that question. It's very interesting to hear both of you speak about both the issue of inclusion, but also the issue of funding. And I'd probably prefer to use the word resources. So first, I think, let me just step back very briefly to address one point that you made, Yasmin, regarding the issue of inclusion. I would say that a seat at the table is better than no seat at the table. So the fact that you are included means that you have to take advantage of that inclusion and make the best of it and ensure that you're able to pass the right messages at every opportunity that you get. I think that is critical. And that is very much linked to the issue of resources as well, right? Because being able to sit at the table with people who are the decision makers, even if you're not making the decisions, you can influence their decisions by ensuring that you're raising awareness. So educate, very important. Know what you're talking about. Follow the science, right? Organize, because unless you organize around facts and you know what it is that you're fighting for, we are not going to be able to get to where we are.
Thank you so much. This was very, you know, lovely to have this setting, you know, being able to have this dialogue. I am privileged, I'm honored, and thank you as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, this was a great dialogue, and it's really, really nice to have the opportunity to actually sit down with you as well. And we're definitely going to hold you accountable for the stuff that you promised during CSW.
Fantastic, because those behind you will also hold you accountable.
Yeah.
It's a shared responsibility.
Of course.
Exactly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was the first episode of EU Talks, focusing on the CSW, gender equality, climate change, and how we can engage youth better in our work.